I'm Michael Bungay Stania. This is Change Signal. This is the podcast where we cut through the blather, the BS and the noise to find the good stuff that works in change. If you are a transformational leader and you're looking for modern change mastery, this is where we stay present to the full catastrophe of the human experience. And shout out to John Kabat-Zinn for really one of the best book titles ever. Now, one of the core foundational things that we're trying to do in any change experience is to shift people's behavior. I mean, if nobody does anything different, have you actually changed anything? Probably not. And it turns out that behavior change is annoyingly tricky, thoroughly unpredictable, and not nearly as quote-unquote common sense as you might think. I mean, you know this just from your own life in terms of just how hard it is for you to change a behavior or shift a habit. I mean, yes, sometimes it's easy, but sometimes it feels nearly impossible. Gah! So I wanted to take a deep dive into better understanding just what it takes. Kristen Berman is the CEO and co-founder of Irrational Labs. I mean, right there, that is such a good name. And Kristen's entire focus is creating behavior design to nudge people to behave in a certain way. Most of her work, I think, is externally focused, partnering with organizations, serving customers and clients and the like. But I know we're going to learn a lot about what it takes to shift people inside organizations as well. Kristen, welcome.
Wonderful to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's really lovely to be talking to you. Could we start with just a really basic question, which is, the people who aren't immersed in your world, what do we get wrong, just as a fundamental misunderstanding or misunderstandings about what it takes to make people change their behavior?
So as a behavioral scientist, we view the world less as people going in it and making optimal decisions based on time and utility, right? What we more think about the world is a series of environments that people are put in, and these environments affect our decision-making.
Right.
And so what people mostly get wrong is that they think that if I just change your mind, I get you to think something different, or I get you to understand something, or I increase your awareness, or, I put on some persuasion technique, that will change your behavior. And sometimes it does, but many times it's really the environment that we're in that drives our decision-making.
I know, dear listener, that you may have heard this before, that the environment we're in drives our decision-making. Everybody nods their head. But I am jumping in here just to shout it out. This is extraordinary, and it is counterintuitive, and it is woefully underdeployed. I mean, this is a profound truth, and we keep forgetting it.
And I'll give you one quick example.
Brilliant.
So I really like M&Ms. In fact, it's 9 a.m. by me, and if, M&Ms were out, I would be eating them.
Very, very Van Halen of you.
Yeah, exactly, yes. So if M&Ms were out, I would be eating them. But you know what? If they were farther away from me and I'd have to get up from this conversation to get them, I would probably eat them less. If they were covered, I would eat them less. If other people were not eating them, I would eat them less. If other people were, I'd eat them more. This does not change anything about my attitude, preference, or belief for M&Ms.
Right.
The environment of decision-making, where the M&Ms is placed, if other people are doing something, actually influences my decision to take that M&M. And that's kind of what, as behavioral scientists, we look for, where what is the environment that's influencing somebody, not necessarily how much do they like M&Ms or not.
Kristen, this actually feels obvious when you say it like that. Why does this idea of, look, what I've got to do is change their mind and their mind exists acontextually, why does that strong myth linger?
Yeah, it's very difficult for us to think about ourselves in this way, that if, I'm just a sheep, and if you drop me into a different school, a different job, a different home, that I would behave differently, because we want to believe that we have agency fully on our decision making. But sadly, or maybe not sadly, because I think a lot of times changing the environment is quite possible to do. We worked with TikTok on decreasing misinformation.
Right.
And this was a few years ago now, but this was when basically TikTok was a little bit behind Twitter and Facebook in kind of labeling content. And so our team came in and said, look, you have all this content that you've identified as misinformation. You now have to tell people. How do you tell people?
Right.
And one thing we did is create a label for the content that had a caution sign. And then when people clicked to share, they tapped to share, we had a pop-up that said, "Are you sure?" And what this did, it didn't have to change their mind. We weren't telling them not to share, but it slowed people down, right?
Right.
TikTok is a very fast platform, so people are in a heated moment.
Yeah.
So the intervention was slowing people down, getting them to pause, reflect, said, "Are you sure?" And by doing this, we didn't change their mind, but we changed their environment, and we decreased shares by 24%. So less people chose to share because they were slowed down because of this small friction intervention. Again, nothing about changing people's minds. It was just slowing them down.
I want to get practical around how we do this, but before we go to the practicality of it, can we get a little philosophical around this tension between, are we sheep? Do we have free will? Because one of the themes that I feel comes out in the conversations I've had with other practitioners is trying to increase a sense of agency in the people in my organization. I want them to feel that they have more choice, they're more capable of acting on those choices. When things don't work out, they can make other choices and they kind of find their way through the world. With the understanding that often in organizations there's a sense of, let's call it infantilizing. You remove that from people. But it feels to me that one of the things that you're saying is, look, this whole idea of agency is a bit of a fiction anyway. As the Churchill quote goes, we shape our buildings, thereafter they shape us. Are we just being shaped by our context the whole time?
I mean, so yes, we are. And that's why it's like very impossible. It would be very difficult for an organization to all of a sudden just decide, I'm going to give people ownership and autonomy. And to be clear, ownership and autonomy is one of the number one drivers of engagement and kind of fulfillment and purpose in a workplace. And so we should be giving people ownership and autonomy. But if you just, sent out an email and said,
congratulations,
okay, now everyone has ownership and autonomy, nothing's going to change. Because why? Because the environment hasn't changed.
Right.
So the meeting culture may not have changed. The design reviews or the check-ins or the things that actually make people, structurally feel like they don't have autonomy and ownership haven't changed. So it's not that we should definitely do this, but we have to change the structure of the organization in order to achieve that goal versus just telling people you should have agency on this, because the structure may not be empowering them to actually do that.
So if I'm wanting to shift some behaviors within an organization, I'm like, we need to be doing this thing a little bit differently. Where do I start in terms of figuring out what's the intervention I want to try and design?
Yeah, it's the question to ask, because when we think about behavioral change, it's figuring out what is the behavior that you want someone to do.
Right.
So that's the starting point. And I think probably the thing that most people miss is either figuring out what that is or being too broad about it. We hate the word, we want to engage our employees, because what does that mean? And by the way, why would you engage them? Imagine a world where you had them go attending a pizza party on a Friday.
Right.
Like, does that mean that they have more ownership, purpose, and will retain with you? Probably not, right?
Right.
So the behavior that you choose to do that levels up to a word like engagement is the most important thing to think about.
So what makes a well-defined behavior? Like, where do people get it right and where do they get it wrong in terms of trying to define a specific behavior?
In our team, we use the word uncomfortably specific. You want to get uncomfortably specific about
I love that.
The behavior, which means that you should be arguing in your team. So you can imagine something that says, every employee should be, what's a behavior that most change managers want to encourage? Maybe.
Well, yeah. Let's say every manager is coaching their team members more often.
Right. Amazing. So what we basically say for that is we'd want to define what coaching means, and we want to define what more often means.
Right.
So we would say every manager is having a feedback session with their employees every other one-on-one. So twice a month, a manager has a feedback conversation. And then you say the feedback conversation looks like this. And one reason that you're specific enough is if you're arguing with somebody on the team. Because if it's too
that's really helpful,
broad, then everyone can agree and shake their heads and says, that sounds great.
Yeah.
But if it's really specific that says, I want a feedback conversation, I can say, I don't think you should have feedback conversations twice a month. That's crazy. That would be so overwhelming for someone.
Right.
And you can debate with the other folks on the team of what is that behavior that you do want to encourage.
Or a quick whisper in your ear, and a reminder of Leanne Davies' really terrific episode, which is number 11, because that is all about your obligation to have more conflict. And partially it's for this reason. You're actually doing the work that creates a reaction, and reaction is engagement. Where does not doing something fit into this? Because as well as often asking people to do something new, you're often asking people to stop doing something old. Or maybe that's all you're doing. You're just saying, look, we just need to stop doing this thing because it doesn't work anymore. Is that substantially different in any way, or is it just another form of behavior?
I'll kind of go back to training toddlers and dogs here to kind of get to the theory of behavior change, and then we'll bring it back to people.
Yeah.
But in kind of a dog training mental model, if you were to say to a dog, don't pee in the kitchen, the dog doesn't know where to pee.
Right.
So you've just told the dog to pee in the living room, basically, right? You haven't told the dog anything interesting about what their good behavior would be. And same with a toddler. If you say like, don't eat this, well, like they're hungry, what should they eat? Or don't do this, or, it. So you want to, when you're kind of talking to these small humans or small pets, give people the behavior to do.
Right.
So you know when you're successful. And I think the same thing in an organization is you want people to have the path of what is success, what is the behavior they should be doing. Now, many times that means not doing something, but we don't want to just say, don't do this. We want to help people know what success actually is.
Building on that, Kristen, is a stronger design to say, A, do this positive behavior, or B, do this positive behavior and also stop doing this other behavior?
It's pretty context dependent. So if you want people to, let's say, stop sending emails on Friday nights, right?
Yeah.
The thing is, then when do you want them to send emails? You want them to send emails Monday morning, or you want them to use the schedule function in Slack or their email thing. And so you can say, look, we don't want you to send an email past 6 p.m. Friday, but then what do they do if they have something that they need to get out? Or look, people work whenever they want to work. Let them work at 6 p.m. on Friday if they want, but they just have to do this behavior to not influence others.
Kristen has a lot more to say at irrationallabs.com. Don't forget there's 2 L's there, one at the end of irrational and one at the start of labs. irrationallabs.com. So that's where you'll find her. And you'll find there a bunch of useful learning resources and case studies. I'd also encourage you to sign up for her newsletter that goes out a couple of times a month. It feels like one of the ways to try and make behavior change happen more easily is by removing stuff to make things more easily. What does that look like?
Yeah, so that's the number one kind of rule of behavior change is make it easier. Now, that doesn't apply all the time. Many times, we wait in long lines for pastries in the morning, and that is hard, and we do it because we like the line.
It's not that hard, but I get what you're saying.
There's a reward at the end.
Yeah, that's right.
And so, in Irrational Labs, we have something called the 3 Bs, which is the 3 Bs behavior change, which is picking up behavior to change, reducing the barriers to that behavior. So removing the friction, making it easy, and increasing the benefits to it. So pick a behavior, remove the barriers, increase the benefits. We always say immediate benefits, something that would immediately be rewarding to me. But that second B is about, reducing friction. And basically, if something's hard or annoying, either logistically, you have to fill out forms, or cognitively, meaning like you have to make a decision. And it's an easy thing to do, but man, it's a tough decision to make. People will do it less because we procrastinate. We maybe will want to do it, but just today is not the day to do it. And tomorrow is a much better day to do it.
Yeah.
And of course, tomorrow is the same thing. So
how do you figure out what the barriers are?
In our world, we do what's called a behavioral diagnosis. And this is like, we call ourselves kind of little hackers. We'll go into a system and identify all the small pieces that go into someone accomplishing the behavior or not accomplishing the behavior. And for us, we lay those out. If it's a digital tech environment, it'll be a list of screens. If it's not, it'll just be a list or a Post-its. And then we think about what is the highest barrier to do something. And it's every decision, every click. If you're asking people to, stay around to again, come to this company pizza party or engagement, Well, traffic's going to be a little bit later if you have to stay later. So that could be a barrier.
Yeah.
Do we offer more commute buses on that day to get people to stay? So you would basically outline everything that you want someone to do. With AI, this is especially important. If you want people to use a new AI tool, when do they have time to do this?
Yeah.
And so you would lay out, well, they have a meeting from 9 to 12, and then they have a lunch break, and then they have to get the stuff done for the meeting.
Yeah.
So really their time to do it is between 4:30 and 5. Do we think that's reasonable? And you'd come to this idea that the barrier to AI adoption is likely time. And you would say something like, well, how would we increase the perception of time that people have or the actual time that they have?
It's interesting that you use the word, do we think that's reasonable? Working 4:30 to 5:30, is that reasonable? Because this is me being tangled up with semantics. In being reasonable makes it sound like there's a rational decision to be made. But I imagine that what we rationally lay out and see as potential barriers to people and what actually are barriers in a irrational way are slightly different. How do we keep not being seduced by the model that human beings are rational?
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard because we once removed like an open text question. So when you ask somebody a question on a web forum, they can type something in, and it's definitely a question everyone should have known. It wasn't a hard question. And when we removed it, the page over page conversion increased by 40%.
Wow.
And that's like small friction. No one would have predicted that people would drop because of this very perceptually easy question. But it was a small amount of friction at the wrong time. And people have other things to do in their life. They're busy. And so, for us, that's why we look at all the small details of a flow to say, look, every single piece of friction can delay or impede a decision. And so you really want to assume the best, that people actually want to do the thing you're trying to get them to do, but They're busy, they have low attention, they don't think other people are doing it, they're not sure. There's some ambiguity, uncertainty. When we have uncertainty, we also delay decision. And so if you can outline all of those steps to the thing you want people to do, all of a sudden you're like, wow, this is really difficult. I can't believe anyone did it in the first place.
Right. And I also, just picking up your TikTok example earlier on, sometimes it's about removing friction. Sometimes it's actually about adding friction into the system. I guess this boils down to just getting really clear on the behavior that you want and the things that are getting in the way of that person behaving in that way. I just want to double down on my own comment here, because I think it's an interesting insight. Your role as a transformational leader is to both remove and to add friction. It's like you're sculpting with clay. You need to be carving away at some things, but building up others. So what you're doing is you're making it easier for the people you serve to move through the change at the right pace, not too fast and not too slow.
Yeah, I think adding cognitive friction always still worries me. Adding logistical friction, maybe not. And I'll explain the difference.
That's a great distinction.
So logistical friction would be like, in order for you to be successful at our product or our experience, we just need some more information from you up front.
Yeah.
We need you to fill out a couple more forms because then the experience is going to be so much better.
Right.
Or, we want to make sure the right people get to the right experience at the right time. And so, we're going to ask you a couple more questions.
Yeah.
For cognitive...
Can I just interrupt for a moment? Just what I'm hearing you in the logistical friction that you're adding is you're not just adding friction, you're adding context and friction. We're asking you these questions so we can deliver an amazing result at the end rather than a half-baked result at the end. So people are like, oh, I understand why you're making me go through these particular steps because there's a benefit. You're promising the benefit around behavior change.
Yeah, exactly. And, for some things, if you're setting up a new environment because you're going to start vibe coding in your work environment, the logistical friction is real. You have to download apps.
Yeah.
You have to, you kind of have to figure. The cognitive friction is uncertainty about, or would be an example, would be uncertainty about what's coming, how long it will take, if you're capable enough to do these things that are in front of you. So a lot of people aren't trying to engage with AI tools or workflows because they just don't know even how to start. And they just don't know kind of like if it's for them or what the use case would be. That's cognitive friction. it could be really, really simple to start, or
Right.
it could be really long to start, but very conceptually easy. But the thing delaying decision is the cognitive. So I'm totally okay increasing logistical friction, especially when the benefit's high enough. You get something really cool at the end. What you also want to do is decrease the uncertainty of starting something.
So you kind of put uncertainty in amongst the cognitive friction, and you said there's one of it is like uncertainty. What's this going to involve? What does this mean? How long is it going to take? One is a capability. You mentioned, can I even do this? Is this going to expose me for being less than in some way, incapable, untalented, whatever it might be? Sorry to keep jumping in here. I mean, maybe it's appropriate because what I'm trying to do is lighten my cognitive load and perhaps yours as well. What I'm taking away from this is process friction is one thing, and sometimes you need more and sometimes you want to create less. But cognitive load is something you need to be thinking about all the time, because it's fair to say that everybody's got too much cognitive load right now. And let's face it, it's one of the real challenges we have with any change process. Okay, back to the conversation. Are there other these kind of deeper levels of resistance that people find that you could perhaps help mitigate?
There's tons. Yeah. I think uncertainty is a one that's studied a lot in behavioral science, because it kind of bleeds into everything. But you can think about information aversion, where you're thinking about you're going to get some bad news, so you're going to delay the decision.
Right.
This happens a lot in test results for the medical field, where people just don't open something. We say we're also regret aversion, which is the likelihood that you may, and if you foresee the future that you may regret something, and so this could cause you to act or not act,
Right.
because you kind of foresee a future self and you just don't know. You don't want that feeling about making a mistake in the future.
Yeah. It's a miracle that anything happens with human beings.
Yeah.
They're so complicated. Look, one of the things you've been implying in this conversation is you don't just map out a process, figure out where the interesting interventions might happen, things you can remove, or where you could add logistical tension to slow things down a bit. But you kind of test these things. You run experiments around them. Tell me what makes for a good experiment and what makes for a less good experiment.
Well, I think, we work a lot in the digital world, and the digital world is quite easy to do experiments, because you basically you have a website and you direct traffic, and half the people get one version and half the people get another version, or maybe there's multiple conditions.
Yeah.
You randomize them, and then you measure which group performed better relative to the thing that you're measuring. So if you want people to click on something, which group clicked more?
Right. This button or that button design.
Yeah. In the HR world, it's actually much, much harder to do experiments, because you have to get two very similar groups. So you imagine like a large company, you get two groups of engineers that are maybe reporting to different managers, but then, oh, wow, they're reporting to different managers. Maybe it's the manager that's affecting things. So we actually find, in kind of organizations, it's much harder to experiment. So what we kind of say there is usually doing slow rollouts is the best, is the easiest form for kind of folks who are not, an academic, to come in and test something, where you're saying, look, we're just not going to give this to everybody at once. We're not going to just give it to the high performing organization and compare the high performing to the everyone else.
Right.
We're going to, kind of spread the juice across and figure out how it worked relative to people who didn't get it. And there's all sorts of issues in we call this like a pre-post experiment, all sorts of experimental issues, but logistically, we haven't seen it be too easy for HR or change management organizations to do a controlled trial.
Got it. What would you teach me around how to understand and react to the results of an experiment or the results of a slow rollout? Like, I'm curious to know how I have the discipline to see it as data rather than success or failure.
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing is many people will hate it. Whatever it is you're doing, many people will hate it. Netflix kind of has publicly said that they don't look at their results. I don't know if it's for 72 hours or week after a change, because people hate change. Numbers will always go down as soon as the change is made. And so you want to actually wait for that kind of resistance. The same in any kind of tech organization launching something, the customer support requests will go up right away. And same with an HR organization or a change, kind of a change element. And so what we basically say is, look, you're always going to piss people off. The question is like, is this representative of everyone, or are these just, the 10% that will always get mad at something?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's something also to first warn the organization before you're doing something, is saying, we know that some people are going to be annoyed. We know that.
Yeah.
And we expect that. And if we stopped because we were scared of them, we would do nothing different ever.
Right.
And so you really have to set that expectation, because otherwise the org will be risk averse and not try to like do something new.
So, Kristen, this has been so helpful. We've understood you've got to define the behavior, and you've got to get uncomfortably specific about that. You want to be having an argument. Then this idea of like, how do we make it easier by removing barriers so that we can understand what might get in the way? But the third part of the B model is this idea of kind of amplifying the benefits. What makes for a good benefit?
Yeah. So I think one way to think about this is, in a classic economics model, a good benefit is money.
Yeah.
So you can imagine a world where every time that you sent an email, I would pay you $2. And now you'd be motivated to send more emails.
Exactly.
You'd get $2. And the $2 would magically appear, right? It wouldn't be delayed. It wouldn't be in your bank account. You'd have cash in your hand after doing it. And so, that's the classic economic incentive. And in behavioral science, we say, look, that's interesting. There's could be all sorts of problems with that. You'd have to continually pay people to do this now. And they're kind of hooked on this incentive. And there's also other ways to do it. And we say we say non-monetary things like social norms. So the reason that I may do something is so that I don't look silly in front of my peers.
Mm-hmm.
It could be that, we worked with a company who was like getting people to put their timesheets in. And then, if you have a list of people who've put them in, or even a list of people who didn't put them in at the end of the week, now all of a sudden you look silly to your peers if you didn't put your timesheet in.
Right.
So there's all sorts of these kind of non-monetary benefits in kind of gamification. People use points, and they use gems, and they use streaks. These things are kind of the immediate non-monetary things that could motivate me to continue. And that's kind of the whole goal. You're getting someone to do the next step of a process. The number one thing to think about is it should be immediate.
Right.
So if you're thinking about, I'm going to change someone's behavior by giving them a quarterly feedback review, that's just too long. That's just not going to work. It's not close enough to the behavior that you're actually trying to incentivize.
That's helpful.
So we want to get something really close to the behavior. And so if you want to reward somebody for like a good meeting that they had, instead of waiting until the end of the quarter, would give them, if it's a spot bonus, or if it's a public email, or even just a one-on-one direct message from the skip level.
Kristen, is there any difference between prizes and punishments for the benefits? Like, we've talked about a number of kind of prizes, like a bonus, or a nice email from your boss's boss, or some sort of public recognition. And we've hinted at the punishment, which is like, we're going to shame you for not having your timesheet in on time. Is there any difference in terms of how you deploy those two different ways of influencing people?
For sure. A lot of times there were some two nice experiments with kind of the shaming thing. We'll go into this, where like you're a voter, and the idea that your voting record would be public could be because you voted, or it could be because you didn't vote.
Right.
And when people thought that it was going to be public because they didn't vote, they were more likely to vote. And now, of course, for both of those conditions, knowing that it would be public was increased the behavior of voting more than not knowing it would be public at all.
Right.
And by the way, this also worked for exercise. When you tell people like your attendance to the YMCA was going to be public, it's worked. Turns out people don't like shaming that much, and may avoid opting into something that has these types of mechanisms to it.
So I can find other places to be publicly humiliated. I don't need to sign up for your scheme.
Right, exactly. And so when we think about that, we think about kind of using quote unquote punishment, you like a one-time thing versus ongoing. Because if you're ongoingly, kind of creating this like negative feeling, one, you may just like say, I'm used to it.
Right. Like
it goes away. And having the one-time idea of like a punishment or a stick, some, people say in the very beginning of something. So you can say, you know what, I think it's really important for people to set up their, to do in a workplace environment, to do like a how to work with me document. That's so important, right?
Mhm.
And so we would say, let's really incentivize all these onboarding behaviors and make sure. And you could say maybe we're going to include some conversation with the manager at the end of the week if they didn't do it, or
Right.
but we wouldn't want to keep that ongoing.
Yeah.
In reality.
Thanks for listening through to the end of the episode. It's very kind of you. I don't have a specific reward for you other than for you to know, direct from me, that you are a marvelous person. Extra marvelous, in fact, if you can help spread the word of the pod. So a review or a shout out on LinkedIn, or my favorite, which is a recommendation to a friend or a colleague of yours. Hey, listen to this podcast. It's a good one. And there's more to be found at thechangesignal.com, including our regular newsletter. Thanks for doing the work. I'm glad you're here.